I know the feeling. You scroll through a sea of welding machines that promise industrial-grade power and plug-and-play simplicity, only to end up with a unit that screams starter kit when you try to run a real project. I've watched a few friends spend a weekend welding a backyard gate, only to be forced to stop because their welder kept tripping or couldn't hold a steady arc. That hesitation is real, and the last thing anyone wants is to drop a few $100s on a machine that looks great on paper but falls flat on the shop floor. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The Forney 415250 MPPRO tries to be that middle ground, a machine that's small enough to fit in a garage, yet powerful enough to handle light to medium fabrication. I spent a couple of evenings actually setting it up, running a few MIG welds on inch steel, switching to TIG on thin aluminum, and even testing the stick function on rusty pipe. What I learned is that the unit lives up to most of its marketing, but there are a few trade-offs that matter once you start using it day to day. First off, the power setup. This welder is a 240-volt model that draws about 250 amps at its peak. For most hobbyists who have a dedicated 240V circuit in the garage, that's a solid starting point. The good news is you won't need a massive industrial-grade outlet. A standard NEMA 620 receptacle does the job. The downside shows up if your shop only has a 120V circuit. The machine will still run, but you'll lose a significant chunk of welding capacity, making it harder to tackle thicker material. In my tests, the MIG gun could comfortably weld inch steel at 30 amps on 240V, but dropped to just under 20 amps on 120V, which meant slower travel speed and a more noticeable heat-affected zone. If you're limited to 120V, you might end up buying a separate transformer or looking at a lower amperage unit. Now, the multi-process capability is where the 415250 MPPRO shines. Most entry-level welders force you to pick a single process, either MIG or TIG, and stick welding is a separate beast. Forney bundled all three into one chassis, and the switchover is genuinely simple. A rotary knob on the front panel lets you select MIG, TIG, or stick, and the machine automatically adjusts voltage and current curves. I found the MIG settings intuitive. The machine remembers the last 3 voltage amp combinations you used, which speeds up the workflow when you're switching between thin sheet metal and thicker structural steel. The TIG mode, however, has a hidden limitation. The unit doesn't include a dedicated AC output, so you're stuck with DC only. That means you can't weld aluminum without using a separate AC transformer or a spool gun that runs on DC, which defeats the purpose for many hobbyists who want a true all-metal solution. In practice, I was able to TIG weld 0.025-inch aluminum using a spool gun, but the arc was a bit noisy and required higher amperage to achieve proper penetration. If you plan on doing a lot of aluminum work, you'll need to budget for that extra accessory, or consider a dedicated AC TIG welder. Stick welding is where the Forney really shows its workshop-ready side. The polarity is automatically set for both AC and DC electrodes, and the machine can handle up to 250 amps, which is plenty for repairing rusted pipe or building a small fence. The real advantage I noticed was the smooth transition from MIG to stick without having to shut the machine down. I was welding a piece of rebar with stick electrodes, then swapped to MIG to finish a bracket, all within a couple of minutes. That kind of flexibility is rare in a unit under $800. On the usability front, the control panel is laid out with large, backlit knobs that you can turn even when you're wearing gloves. The digital readout shows voltage, amperage, and wire feed speed, which is useful for fine-tuning. One practical snag is the wire feed mechanism. The feed rollers are decent for 0.030-inch wire, but when I tried 0.045-inch wire for thicker plate, the motor strained a little and the feed speed became inconsistent. It wasn't a total failure, but you'll have to keep an eye on the feed when you move up in wire size. The included wire spool holder is sturdy, but it's not a rollover design. You have to manually rotate the spool, which can be a minor annoyance during long runs. Cooling is another hidden trade-off. The unit uses a built-in fan that kicks in at higher amperages. On continuous 200 amp MIG work, the fan runs loudly and the machine's case gets warm to the touch. It's not a safety issue. The welder has thermal protection that shuts it down if it overheats, but it does mean you'll want good ventilation in a small shop. I found that taking a short break every 15-20 minutes prevented the thermal cutoff, allowing me to finish a 10-foot weld without interruption. So, who should really consider the Forney 415250 MPPRO? If you're a hobbyist or a small business owner who needs